I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today is Wednesday, April 13th, 2022, and I'm glad to have two special guests on the program today. Announcing first that my co-host today is a friend and elder leader in community, Imam Makram El-Amin, who leads Masjid An-Nur around the corner from Insight News here in North Minneapolis. And today we also have the pleasure of another guest, a friend and colleague, John Wilgers. John Wilgers is the CEO of Greater Twin Cities United Way. Let me start off by, in the spirit of transparency, saying that I'm on the board of Greater Twin Cities United Way. I enjoy being on the organization. It's a great organization doing phenomenal work for our community, and that presently I am the vice chair of the board. So, and finally, my company does business marketing and outreach for the United Way as well. So that being on the table, I expect this will be a wonderful conversation. And Brother Imam Makram El-Amin, first of all, thank you for being here. I'm going to talk to John Wilgers first, but you jump in where you want to co-host with me. This is a conversation among companions, among friends.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
And let me ask you, in the sense of protocols, how would members of the Islamic or Muslim community open a meeting? How would you do that?
I mean, we recognize, God, the creator, before all things, and then we proceed with our business, of the business of what we're here for. So we want to do that in this moment as well. With God's name, the merciful benefactor, merciful redeemer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, John. Thank you again for being here. Big news today. I think this morning at 8 o'clock, we at the United Way announced that we're granting about $12.1 million to about 90 organizations in Twin Cities. And I ask you to come on to make that announcement here as well. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and tell our viewers and listeners what's going on right now and why it's so important for our community.
Yeah, so thank you, Al. So first of all, Al, thank you for disclosing that you're on our board, because it gives me an opportunity to thank you for the partnership and the leadership and all the counsel and guidance that you provide in that role. So we're really appreciative of that. So I didn't want the conversation to go by without extending that gratitude to you. So thanks for that.
Sure.
Yes, today we're very excited. Today we announced that we would be giving this year $12 million in grants, as you said, to 90 nonprofits in our community. It's really made up of three groups of grants. The most significant group, like $10.5 million of that, is going to 89 nonprofit partners who participated in a competitive grant making round, and we're very excited about the organizations that responded and are privileged to be able to fund them. So those are multi-year grants to fund operating expenses of these nonprofit partners who are working in areas and doing work that we think is really important. Another $1.2 million will be our first round of grants associated with one of our innovation initiatives called 80 by 3. 80 by 3 stands for the fact that 80% of brain development happens in the first 3 years of a child's life. And many children in our community experience a significant amount of trauma in those first 3 years, which impacts brain development. And what this initiative is focused on is caregivers and parents, and working with them to be able to provide trauma-informed care and facilitate the brain development that should be happening in that period, so that when they get to B3, they're where they need to be. So it's an exciting initiative as well. And then the last group, around 400,000, will be continuing grants in our innovation initiative called Career Academies. And so that's an initiative that we've been doing for a number of years, and we're excited to be able to make these grants around career academies. So altogether, $12.1 million for the year, to some very, very deserving organizations.
How about a general sense, John, of the environment right now for giving, and take into consideration two or three, concurrent activities. One is we're in a difficult social environment post George Floyd. That's one thing. We're in a difficult environment because of COVID-19. We're in a difficult environment right now because of what's happening in the Ukraine, the uncertainty there, and the pressure it puts on everybody in the world. And then we also, sort of as an extension, or the thing that George Floyd called to our attention, are living with the historical system and set of impediments to inclusion, engagement, equity. So describe the environment of philanthropy and caring and sharing that the United Way stands for in this context, if you would.
Yeah.
Big question.
So you named four big factors, right, that are impacting philanthropy and the work we do. I would add a fifth to that. I would add inflation, which is something that we're experiencing. I don't know. I think I heard on the radio potentially for a 40-year high inflationary environment right now. So that impacts these things as well. The last couple of years have been, I kind of think of it as the tale of two stories from a philanthropy perspective. On the one hand, our community, like it always does, responded really, really strong to some of the things that were happening in our environment. COVID funding of COVID support, we got great support from our donors on that. The shortly after the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed, you'll remember that we launched a fund that we called the Recovery and Rebuild Fund that went to rebuild businesses that had been damaged or destroyed as a result of the civil unrest. We got a very generous response to that. So, we saw our community respond to some of these special needs that were out there generously. The flip side, there was a lot of uncertainty in the labor environment. People were laid off, they were furloughed. United Way raises a significant amount of our money through our corporate partners and specifically workplace campaigns. People were remote, working virtually. We've never really conducted campaigns entirely virtually before, so that was a big transition for us. So so when I say it's a tale of two stories, I mean it was an opportunity for organizations like United Way and our nonprofit partner to work in ways, to pivot in ways, to demonstrate relevance in ways, kind of an unprecedented. And the flip side, we also experienced challenges from a support perspective, people experiencing uncertainty, like we said, because of the economic environment that caused uncertainty there. But all in all, I think we're weathering, at least United Way as an organization is weathering that storm well. And but it is complicated. I told a number of people back in 20 and 21 that I thought 2022, and this was before, the global conflict, the war in Ukraine. This was before inflation. I said 2022 could be our most challenging year. And they would say, well, why is that? And I said, well, first of all, we don't know what normal is going to be like then, but it's not going to be like it is now. And we had a lot of good but non-recurring sources of revenue, either through some of those special funds or through some government programs that were out there that were very helpful to organizations like ours and other nonprofits and businesses. And we also tightly controlled expenses in some ways that frankly weren't sustainable for the long-term health of the organization. So you knew when we got to 2022, some of the non-recurring sources of revenues were likely not going to be there. And some of those unsustainable expense management techniques that we used were going to come back. And we knew what 2022 was going to look like. And again, I think it's going to be fine, but it'll continue to be challenging. So
I notice in our release today, John, announcing the award, the grants being awarded. I love this language. It says funding will support people experiencing poverty and communities disproportionately impacted by poverty. And that includes Black, Indigenous, Latinx, American Indian, Pacific Islander, and people of color. And prior to that, it says the funding of these organizations is funding aligned with United Way's vision of a community where all people thrive, regardless of income level, race, or place. And somewhere else in this release or a previous one, I saw language saying that the mission, the vision being supported in these grants and also in the internal organization of Twin Cities United Way is a mission of dismantling, I may be saying the word wrong, but of dismantling racism or inequity. Is that the right, maybe inequity was the word that I'm thinking of. But speak to that. How is the organization with intention addressing the racial chasm, the historic sense of institutional structural barriers to opportunity and advancement? How does this organization, and I'm attesting to the fact that we are doing this work, but you explain it. How are we approaching that, and without guaranteed outcomes, making the right kind of effort? Talk about that, both externally and internally in the organization.
So, like you set out, Greater Twin Cities United Way, as an organization, has always been focused on addressing the most significant and persistent needs in our community, and under almost any measure that you look at, look at housing, look at food insecurity, look at employment, look at pay gaps, look at education gaps. Almost any measure that you look at, people of color and people living in poverty are significantly disproportionately represented in all of those groups. And so those are the groups that in our work we are committed to addressing. And so racial equity is front and center in every decision that we make, both inside and but in particular in our investment in community. So if you look at the grants that we announced today, and looked at the decision-making criteria, organizations that are serving people that are working to themselves, that have significant commitment as an organization to disrupting racial inequities, that was an important part of our scoring criteria. And we looked to several measures. We looked to the communities they serve, the way they engage community in deciding how they're going to serve how they're going to serve the people that they're serving. We looked at their leadership team, because we know that organizations that have people like them reflected in the leadership team are doing more effective and more lasting work in the community. So all of those things weighed into our decision-making criteria. Beyond the grant making, you can look at our policy and advocacy agenda and see how it leans into racial equity and other inequities. Almost everything we do, Al, everything we do in community, we look at it through the lens of equity. And like I said, I think that comes through in the grants that we announced today. Inside our organization, we have that same commitment. We're committed to having leadership, diverse leadership represented in our leadership group. As you know, because you also serve on our governance committee, a real significant focus of our governance committee is building diversity into our board. I think 3 years ago, 28% of our board represented, a person of color, and I think now we're at 40%. identify as a person of color. So we've made great progress there, but it is a recruitment priority every year when we start to build out our board class. We've in our hiring practices, we source diverse pools. I could go on and on. There isn't anything that we do inside and outside the organization where equity doesn't lead and inform decisions that we make.
It's important, John, to have this conversation for me to ask you and to allow you to articulate that experience so that people can hear it. Part of the challenge is to create a public understanding that this is doable. It can be done, that we're up to it, we're up for it, and that with intentionality, we can change and improve the lives of everybody in our community. And that improving people's lives doesn't mean at the expense of anybody else. It's having a better idea and a greater commitment, a broader approach to inclusion that at the end of the day means we all are strengthened by being each other's sister and brother. That's what I see us doing and saying in this work. Brother Imam,
yes.
Thank you for being here. Jump in wherever you want to. This is a good time to focus, I think. And before I have you jump in, I wanted John Wilgers to invite people to support the United Way. People can give, they can support, they can volunteer. How many ways can people touch this work and be part of the work and or be beneficiaries of it? What do you think, John Wilgers?
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity. You know, we're able to do our work because of the support we get from our community members, and we're grateful to our people who participate through workplace campaigns. We're grateful to our corporate partners. We're grateful to our nonprofit partners and individuals, and much of our support comes from individuals. And so we hope you will join us in this work through financial support. There are also lots of opportunities for people to participate from a volunteerism perspective as well. This morning, I was out at Post Consumer Brands, which is one of our corporate partners, and they were hosting an employee volunteer day, well, 2 days actually, today and tomorrow, where they were packing our Flavors of the Community packs. One of our volunteer initiatives that you can do from an at-home perspective or from a corporate perspective. And in that, we went out and met with a number of our nonprofit partners who address food insecurity in our community, and specifically in communities that contain people from various cultures. And one of the challenges is their ability to get at food shelves culturally relevant food that allow them to eat and enjoy things that they are used to eating and enjoying. Food plays such an important part in all of our cultures and all of our relationships, and it's been difficult. So they were out putting together spice and food packs that were designed in partnership with a few of our nonprofit partners, and then will be distributed through them. So there are always lots of opportunities to volunteer. And then we always just appreciate advocates, people who know what we're doing and are willing to talk about it and share it with others. So those are some of the ways that people can really help us.
John, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service and your leadership. Tomorrow's show, I'm going to have one of your team leaders, Akua Ellis, who heads the Impact Initiative, and others at the Twin Cities United Way. So I'm looking forward to her. Akua, I don't know if you know her, Imam, but she is a dynamite, just an absolute force of nature, organized, powerful, clear, and principled in all respects, like John, a human being par excellence, the best. So I'm looking forward to that conversation tomorrow as well. John, thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful.
It was
Any questions you have for John?
Sure. First, I want to just acknowledge John Wilgers and the United Way for the outstanding support that is coming to the community in such a generous way in this round, supporting so many organizations. Our organization was also one of the recipients of that. So I know you didn't know that ahead of time here, but I'm letting you know. Maa'uun is our organization that we do a lot around food insecurity, affordable housing, employment, and mentoring in North Minneapolis, but also in the outskirts areas as well. So and just really one of the things that you mentioned that I really, really appreciate is the idea that we, through 20 and 21, we did see great influx of resources just because of so many things happening and the generosity of philanthropy, but also just donors really supported and stood up to work in ways that we've really never seen from a nonprofit perspective. And, I can't remember. But also, we also knew that this, as you just mentioned, 2022 was around the corner where a lot of those things were begin to go away. And us being on the front line, working with families, individuals, and et cetera, we see that, there's less room for margin with these families and individuals. So we're seeing that, and people are really having a lot of anxiety and whatnot as well. So the support from United Way as well as others will actually help us to lessen that blow for them, but also facilitate a path towards some sustainability in many ways. So just really grateful for the work that you all are doing. We're just, introducing ourselves and getting to know United Way, but we hope to be a long-term partnership, doing some really good work and partnership on the ground here in areas that we need it most. So just want to really thank you, message of gratitude this morning for the work that you all are doing.
Well, congratulations, and we're happy to have you as a nonprofit partner. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, brother Imam, I call you brother because you're my brother,
Yes.
but I want to acknowledge your important role as a leader, as the Imam at the Masjid An-Nur. I'm from the neighborhood. You are too. I think you might be. Are you born here? Are you a native?
Right. I was born in Chicago, but we moved here when we were kids. So yes, I've grown up here. Yes.
You just like air in the neighborhood. You're everywhere. Everybody knows you. Everybody knows your family. Your family is one of the assets of our community. And
thank you for that. Thank you.
You walk in and around and carry a legacy of excellence and of integrity and of selflessness and service to our community. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. But I have always been an admirer of the notion of discipline and of self-discovery, self-awareness that I see as a teaching of the Muslim community. And I remember, and I'm going to ask you to walk through this with me, the notion that for many of us, the first introduction to Islam was seeing the guys on the street corner selling Muhammad Speaks. That's when we saw and knew and met the Nation of Islam, created by or brought forth by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We know that when he transitioned into ancestorhood, his son, W.D. Muhammad, became the leader of the organization and then facilitated a change in the philosophy and orientation, sort of an expansion and a realignment of the work. And we see that you have carried forth, both locally and internationally, that vision and that work. So I wanted to ask you to talk about the genesis of Black people in America, in Twin Cities, and our relationship with Islam. And before I let that go, I remember my reading is that many of us who were captured and enslaved in West Africa were Muslims.
Yes.
That Islam was a major belief system in much of Central and even West Africa. And so that these people came here and under the yoke of colonial and imperial and slavocracy were denied and were punished, I can't think of an aggressive enough set of words to talk about the horror of our experience out of the transatlantic slave trade and the consequences of it. But I think that right now we're discovering more about our history to our origins in West Africa and beyond that to our ancient origins in East Africa, the cradle of civilization. So I'm going to stop there and have you give us a story about Islam, the Muslim community, Black folks in Minnesota, Blacks in America.
Yes, yes.
That's a
Again,
lot
thank you. It is, and we got, whatever we do, it's going to be a summary version of it. I tell you that, right?
There we
So,
go.
you know, I think, you know, it's really challenging to talk about the Islam in America, particularly amongst African Americans, without acknowledging, you know, the freedom movements in this country, right? And this idea of people wanting to really to be free, you know, and be liberated in a way to serve God, basically, and live their best lives unencumbered and the like, and how that, you know, translates through, as you mentioned, the transatlantic slave trade, but also in the days of you know, the freedom, Jim Crow, all these kinds of various movements through the civil rights movement, even to present day. You know, it has to be seen within the context. It's not in the vacuum. It definitely is in the context. You know, I remember as a child, sitting around the table, the kitchen table with my parents, my mother, my father, really teaching us and orientating us. And they would always lead in, my father particularly, but he would always lead in and say, Islam is about freedom, justice, and equality. And this idea of those three principles were really ingrained in myself and my siblings and our extended family, to where it was really always about a justice movement. It was always about allowing people to be free, again, to serve their best life, to show up in their best way, and to serve God, right? So I think that even the different iterations that we see in the Nation of Islam and other movements, there were other movements besides the Nation of Islam as well, all of them were striving in this vein. All of them were really reaching towards this interest of allowing people to be free, right? To live the ideals of what this country was really built upon, right? And it challenged this, and continues to challenge this country to be who we say we are on our label, with the content consistent with the label, and the label consistent with the content, right? So the idea of us really pushing that envelope and doing it in such a way that in a way of integrity, though, but in a way of truthfulness, a way of showing up, always caring about the folks that we're doing, that we live amongst, that we serve, and so on. You know, we don't serve food that we won't eat. We won't house people in places we won't live. We won't give clothing that we won't wear. These are just value statements that we bring forth, and it comes out of that tradition, out of that movement, out of that idea that everybody is a human being valued by God. If you're created by God, which we all are, then you have inherent value and worth that Islam recognizes, and we all should recognize. So these are the kinds of ideals. These are the kinds of things that we have grown. There's so many stories, too many to tell you all in one setting. But I think that one of the things that my parents instilled in us is the idea of service. That there is no Islam. There is no true representation of faith that does not translate itself into service. So we have been about that. We've tried our best to represent them. Even the work that we're doing. My father, he passed on in 2019. God rest his soul, you know, and I'm always thinking, it was just his birthday early this week on the 7th of April, and I went to visit his grave, and I'm always just been making sure, and I want to be concerned that I'm representing what he instilled into us, and my mother and my parents, and etc. And these are values and traditions that Islam brings forth for us as well. So it has a place. I think will always have a place. I think the influence of Islam amongst African Americans is still shown. There are people who have Muslim-oriented names, even though they're not necessarily of the faith. But I think that's also just a consequence of being exposed and benefiting from Islam in the Black community.
Talk about names, naming. I love that. We grew up in an era where we had names like Al McFarlane or Charles Brown or Bill Wilson. And some of us in the movement era, I'd say the 60s, became part of the Black consciousness movement. And some of us chose to adopt African names or, African names, Afrocentric names. And even in our community, there was an ambivalence about that. We would say to ourselves, oh, he calls himself Jamal,
Yeah.
but I know his name is really Charlie. And so there was still a reticence within us, within the culture, to accept the power of the person to name herself, himself, and to live in that name and live out that name, and to have that kind of personal accountability, because the naming means you stepped outside of the convention, the expectation, and the convention and expectation were a byproduct of white supremacist thought, of white culture. And so talk about the question of naming. How does naming mean something to us and to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I'm sitting here smiling. I'm thinking about the second grade when my parents pulled us out of school one day, me and my five siblings, or four siblings at that time. My youngest brother wasn't born yet, and took us downtown in Hennepin County when we got here, and formally changed our names, you know, and I was born Mark Dawson. My last name was Dawson, 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 and which is my grandmother's name, and so on and so forth that we had. But when we came into Islam, and Islam, really the emphasis on that, and really the teachings, that one of the basic teachings is everyone should have a good and a name with good meaning. A name that means something, right? Again, it's that whole idea of the content being true to the label, right? So my name was, again, birth name, Mark Dawson. I became Makram, meaning one who is noble and generous, right? And El-Amin, one who is trusted and trustworthy, right? So now I had to hold that, and believe you me, at our table talks, I was reminded more often than I would like to admit about what my name meant, and how that my character must be reflection of my name, and so on. So these are very integral parts of our experience. I think that it does, it's really what we would call, we didn't know it back then, but today we call it owning the narrative, right? It was owning our own personal narrative by the names, the labels, the meanings, the definitions that we called ourselves. So there's so many of us have those experiences where we would say, and Al, you know, we would say in the hood, so to speak, we would say, my government name is Charlie Wilson, right?
Right, that's right.
I choose to call my name is Muhammad, or my name is this, or my name is that, and so on, because it was us trying to own that narrative, and that started by how we referenced ourselves, how we call, and then what we also insisted that others called themselves. Muhammad Ali, from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, is emblematic of that whole struggle that many of us had. We just weren't famous like that, right? But the idea of him insisting that he'd be called by this because of the meaning that came with behind that name, and this is what we were trying to live up to. So this is part and parcel to our experience. This is who we are. This is I think a value that we bring, and it's something that, you know, we choose not to, we choose not to have nicknames, a lot of things, particularly the derogatory nicknames and sort of thing. We insist, because it's necessary. We insist that our name is fully represented and enunciated in the way that it should be as well, because to change the name, that changes its meaning, and we don't want to do that, right? So yeah, the names are significant, hugely significant. You know, even the idea of our organization, Maa'uun, you know, it means neighborly needs. It translates neighborly needs. So our work is about the neighbor. Our work in Islam puts so much emphasis on the neighbor and the rights of your neighbor, you know, over you, how you have to look out and so on. And we want that to be represented in our work, in our personal selves, and also just in our overall identity.
You know, I think about the challenge that I described earlier, where we, on the one hand, appreciated and admired people who changed their names, and the understanding of why they said they changed their name. They do things like saying a free man named himself, right? And that was their call to distinction. And then how we were duplicitous at the same time, because we remembered the original name, the Al or Mark or whatever. And then we also, in that duplicity, I think, were suffering from our incessant desire for white approval. And I think we had a sense that white people didn't really appreciate us abandoning their names, their naming system, or attempting to create names of our own for whatever it meant. Whether they did or not, this was the internal dialogue in our community, right? And then what I noticed as a major and important difference, Imam, was when the brothers and sisters from Somalia arrived, because we had been calling each other like, you know, Makram and Mahmoud and Yusuf and these names, and always with in the back of our mind with a wink and a nod. But then here shows up 20 Abdis, you know, Abdirizak, you know, Abdi Kadir, Miriam, Yusuf. And this is the common currency of language of thousands of people who are now in our community, who look like us and who I believe in their presence validate the inclination to be aware of the power of a name, the historicity of a name. And so I celebrate the arrival and the interaction of our brothers from the Horn of Africa, from Somali communities in particular, not only because of that naming thing, but also the spirit of engagement and the hustle that brothers bring to the community. So what is the relationship between the Somali Muslim community and the African American? And I don't want to be limiting like that. I think the question is improperly limiting. So
I understand.
Forgive me for the question.
I understand. I fully understand.
But how do we show up with each other and for each other?
Yeah, you know, it's like any other relationship. You know, it's one that has to be built. You know, a lot of times, you know, we because we have been separated from one another, you know, we have to come to know each other again, like any other human interaction. All that still is present, but I think in its best representation is really an extension of one another. You know, I think one of the things that we've seen in our mosque has grown very diverse, very much diverse. I mean, I jokingly tell it we're quite the buffet. You know, you can get a little bit of this and a little bit of that when you come to visit us, right? Which and I think that's a good, healthy, strong thing to have happen. But but there's also just that idea of coming together, of unity, and then having the narratives being formed, right? You know, they have a narrative. They're coming from the Horn of Africa. Most recently, we have the experience of being here in the United States and what they did in their new home, and then the fusion of those things. And we're seeing that now amongst our children now our children and their children who grow up together, who go to school together and so on. You know, I tell anybody, once you have been, you know, a part of any sort of system like this for a number of years, you know, you become a part of that. You know, it's very interwoven. And we're seeing that now as well. So they are forever part of the, you know, the unique, you know, spiritual and ethnic tapestry of what Minneapolis is and what Minnesota is, and this country will be, and it's growing. It's not without challenge. I don't want to make it seem like it's not. It is, because that's not true. It does have its inherent challenges, but no different than any other different groups coming together and having to learn, in some cases, relearn one another and those dynamics that show themselves up in that space. But we lead with our faith, and our faith calls us to be unified. Our faith calls us to value one another. Our faith calls us to respect and honor each other. So anytime those things show themselves, you know, we're reminded through our traditions of how we need to treat each other and interact and so on. And for the most part, we do that very well. But it's a progressional relationship that is growing. But when it gets in full bloom and when it shows itself, it'll be very, very beautiful for sure.
And yet, Imam, some of us fear each other, fear what we see and discover in ourselves when we look at each other. And so I say that I remember as a kid growing up in Kansas City, and my grandfather was a pastor in a Pentecostal church, and I was kind of raised in that tradition. But I remember his warnings about Islam and about the nation of Islam in particular, and about you know, what people were calling them Black Muslims, right? So on the one hand, there's this almost irrational fear of an idea, an ideology a religion, an expression of faith that these men and women represented. On the other hand, if you looked, what you saw was people who had been broken finding repairing themselves, right? And standing up and working, being productive, and being respectful, leading model citizen lives, the lives that we say our country produces. These were examples of that, and they were called to be examples by the work, the vision, and the power of the message of Elijah Muhammad, right? At that time. And so a lot of us are still confused about, we're almost afraid in our Christianity, not operating in the Christian world with the confidence and power of love that lies at the core of the experience and the message, but reactionary still. What do you say about that? Am I?
Here's what I would say. I think that, what you're describing is that our community has never been a monolith. You're right. It's never been, just one voice, one narrative, one for any. And I think that even in movements from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King, right? These ideas that, trying to reach the same ultimate goal, ultimate aim was freedom, liberation, self-awareness, identity, and all these things. But the paths that were taken vary. They did vary, right? I think that, the Nation of Islam was a movement that came to African-American people at a time in that very broken state, right? That idea to where having to repair the damage that has been done. And one of the things that it did was gave a level of confidence. It instilled a level of confidence that you saw. So when you saw those men dressed in the way that they were dressed, both as very sharp, the women looked dignified and so on, this was a direct result of the confidence that had been instilled and really ingrained into these ideas that we are to show up as dignified human beings, not what the world has said of us. Not we're throwing off that was as much about resistance, Al, as anything that we would ever have done. That was much about how we showed up. We controlled our own temple, our own body, our own vessel, how we did that, what we allowed to put into ourselves, how we ate, to eat, to live, all these kinds of things. All these things was really a paradigm shift in the mind of African Americans at that time. And this was ushered through the Nation of Islam and other movements. I want to be very clear that there were also other efforts that were about Marcus Garvey and others, right? That had very similar ideas. It wasn't unique in that way. It's part of the tapestry, right? And I want to just be very clear about that. We don't own the narrative. We are part of the story, right? And I think that when it comes to the issue between Christianity and I think it was really about the image issues, right? And seeing ourselves as being in a favored light as opposed to trying to negotiate what seemingly was someone else in that light. How do we do that? How do we understand that? And the psychological damage that takes place over generations that has been passed down to where, the saving force is from somewhere outside of us, not within us, right? That's an unraveling of a people. That's an unraveling psychologically, socially, and others, right? So I think that these were the kinds of challenges in the narratives that put them, and we had great orators too, right? We had great men and women who they didn't mince words, or they said what they meant and they meant what they said, and they were very articulate and they could persuade. So I think those were challenges that I think that others saw they perceived them as challenges when you peel back, and when you peel that onion all the way back, it was really trying to get to the same end, but they were convinced there was another route to be taken as opposed to the route that was presently being presented to us, right? So I think that's really, a way to maybe perceive that or contextualize what was taking place then, and it's still present. I mean, I still see some of our brothers, we love each other, but we also, we're still examining in many ways, ways to negotiate that relationship. But at the end of the day, I know what they want is ultimately what I want. And I think vice versa, what they perceive us as well.
And John Wilgers, I think that what Imam Makram El-Amin and I are saying is something that you want as well at the end of the day. And so I'm glad that you were able to stick around and enjoy this
Yes.
conversation between us, because it's between all three of us and hopefully thousands of others who will get to this on social media over a
Yeah.
period of time, certainly through our newspaper, the stories that will come out of this. But as you hear this conversation, one of the things that we're doing at United Way is focusing on undoing the supremacist thought, undoing structural racism. And we talk about white privilege. You've had Robin, I think, what's Robin's last name? Robin, the writer, she was last year.
Yeah, Robin DiAngelo. Yep.
Robin DiAngelo and others really talk and work the board and the community through understanding our failings as human beings and how that failing shows up institutionalized to the disadvantage of everybody, and certainly to the disservice of grand ideals of our country and of humanity. So when you hear us talking, what are you thinking, John Wilgers?
Well, every time I hear, every conversation I have with you, Alan, I can add the Imam to that, I learn something. You know, I get a deeper appreciation for history and lived experience and how it should be informing the work of United Way. And so I hear the conversation with you and I see how directly it's tied to the way we decide to work, what we do and how we do it is by engaging in community and hearing the kind of stories that you tell and the experiences you tell, and let that inform our work and inform the investments that we make. So, you know, what I've learned is it's really been confirmation of the value that comes from listening, and so I've appreciated the chance. Yeah.
And so the shift that has to happen and that is happening, and part of it out of the George Floyd experience, is companies, our supporters, deciding they should do more and do differently. And this conversation, from my point of view, John, is a conversation that should enable them to understand better and to be more focused and more committed on shared values and leading with the values as United Way is demonstrating it's possible to lead doing the right thing, doing it the right way. Do you see resistance or support? I think there's support in the corporate community, but there have to be obviously pockets of resistance or pockets of people seeing things oppositely or differently.
Yeah.
How do you describe the lay of the land right now in our political, cultural, and social environment in particular?
Yep. So I think you're right. I think both COVID and the murder of George Floyd, as well as, you know, the tragedies impacting a number of people in our community, not just George Floyd. It's, unfortunately, there have been a number of tragedies in our community. They've shined a light on really the disparities we've been talking about, and have resulted, I believe, in corporations and corporate leaders investing in this work, in learning and supporting this work in ways that they that they perhaps haven't before this time. You know, the challenge, you're going to have Akua on tomorrow, and one of the things that Akua and I talk about all the time is how are we and how do we need to take advantage of where people are right now to make the kind of progress we need to make, but before, if they do, before they slip back into maybe a less active position or a less invested mindset towards taking these issues on. So, you know, I keep saying that we need to make this this moment a movement, and while I think we've tried to do that, with every passing day, I worry that that we can't let it slip away. And so I think that's what's out there. Does everybody see it the same way we do? Not exactly. And I do have conversations every every week with someone who wants to understand more deeply the way we are making decisions, and want to understand more deeply how we're investing in community, that and so we have discussions, and we try to bring them along, acknowledging not every single person is going to be in the same place, and so the discussions need to be tailored to really advance their position, advance their understanding, and bring them along with us. But everybody's not in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Imam Makram El-Amin, you used the word narrative. You talked about us building new narratives, alternative narratives. We're going to close in a couple of minutes here, but close with you talking about your vision of the kind of community, the kind of society that we can build, that we can create, that we have to decide that we will be the authors of, and that gives us the impetus to live this work every day, all day. What's the vision that's pulling you? Or maybe it's the story that's pushing you, or both. It's maybe it's the power, the extraordinary power of the moment that we're in. Talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are in a very incredible moment that we're having right now. But as I think it from a visionary standpoint, it's emblematic in really what we're doing right here, right now, Al. And I have to credit you for this. It's having a platform where you have two individuals from very different backgrounds, very different situations and upbringings, but nonetheless are able to come together and with a share of some ideals and ideas together that will make us all better collectively, right? Just as you was reading in from the press statement a little bit earlier, some of those ideas that was coming from the United Way and those kind of things. I think that taking those words and making those words tangible, making those words have deep roots, and making those words, standing them up so they can be actualized and realized in the lives of people, of real live people, right? So I think the idea that I see is, and how we turn, moments to movements is through institution building and infrastructure, right? The idea is to where, we want to be in a position. We've always been in a position to where we've had this mantra for many years from the Black Muslim perspective of doing for self, doing for self, right? So we have not, and never will we be in a position of being really just more charity minded. That's like you have something, we're supposed to get something. No, we want to have access. Accessibility is one of those issues. The other is that we want to also add value so that it's not a situation where we're doing each other favors. No, it's mutual benefit that takes place here, because ultimately as a man, I want my children and now my grandchildren to see me benefiting by my own work and my own sweat and my own work that I'm putting forth to create the life that I'm calling them to have. That translates through the generation. That translates through not only my life, but my son's life and my grandson's life, and so on and so forth. And that's when our communities get healthy. That's when our communities are growing and thriving. And institutions like United Way, other corporate partners and others can have a hand in doing this. They can have a hand in helping to support this, but in a way that builds us up so that we can be self-sustained on our own rights and our own merit and creating our own narratives, right? So I think that this is the exciting future that I see. I see steps in that direction. I do see these things too, but we're going to have to be intentional, because everything starts and ends with the relationship. It's going to start and end with the relationship. And I think that building these relationships through platforms like these and others, where conversations create ideas and ideas translate into tangible results, those are the ways that we turn these things around and we benefit. Because when people's lives change, the world changes. When people's lives improve, that's how the world improves, right? So, and this doesn't happen all at one time. It happens over the course of time. So, we have to have the long view. And I know that you do for the institution that you have built with Insight News and everything, and John as well, the work that you're doing, United Way. You guys couldn't be around doing the work you're doing for so long, helping so many people without the long view. We just need to focus that long view on this issue and this moment at hand, and so that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, too, they can talk back about the contributions that collective we were able to make out of a very difficult moment. Out of a very tenuous moment, that we were able to create something that's beautiful, that people that we won't even know, we won't know their names, we won't know who they are, their identity won't be known to us, their ethnicity won't be known to us, but they still will benefit from the work we're doing today. And that really primarily is the vision that I see and that I want to be in partnership about.
Before we close, I want to tell people about a book that I'm starting to read now. It's called Whiteness in Plain View. The author is Chad Montree. It is published by Minnesota Historical Society Press, if I get it straight there. And it's a powerful book. The notes on the back, I'll read one paragraph. The headline says, "Minnesota is a paradox. Whiteness in Plain View examines the ways white residents across Minnesota acted to intimidate, control, remove, and keep out African Americans over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. Their methods ranged from anonymous threats, vandalism, and mob violence to restrictive housing covenants, realtor deceit, and mortgage discrimination, and they were aided by local, state, and federal government agencies, as well as openly complicit public officials. What they did was not an anomaly or aberration in some particular place or passing moment, but rather common and continuous." Chapter by chapter, this book shows that Minnesota's overwhelming whiteness is neither accidental nor incidental, and that the racial exclusion legacy is very much woven into the state's contemporary politics, economy, and culture. I'm going to recommend this to all of you and to all of our viewers. This is a discussion that we have to have. And it's a discussion that will make most sense when when everybody in the community has a chance to develop the tools, the knowledge to examine and make commitments to the correction. Listen, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for hanging out with me today. Imam Makram El-Amin, leader at Masjid An-Nur, 1759. Is that the
1729.
I know your building, 1729 Lindale,
Yes, yes.
Minneapolis. A beautiful building with a dome, right? Gold dome. Beautiful and a wonderful institution. And the El-Amin Family Institution, I thank you for that as well. And John, my friend, CEO of Greater Twin Cities United Way, thank you for the announcements today, the awards that our organization is making to support our communities. And thank you all for listening and watching as well. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.